In just over a year, Fortnite Ballistic lost 93% of its players. So how did a mode that started with so much potential fall off this quickly? 1 year ago, Fortnite tried something new, a tactical shooter mode, Fortnite Ballistic. It was Epic's answer to compete with the likes of Valorant and Counter-Strike. At first, the mode was surprisingly promising, but only a few months later, it was fading quickly into the background. So what happened? Today, we're looking at the rise and sudden fall of Fortnite Ballistic. At its peak, thousands of players were trying the mode. Today, only a small fraction of them remain. So where did it all start to go wrong? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning, or December 11th, 2024, the day Ballistic launched. Fortnite had just dropped a trailer for the mode, building excitement overnight. The trailer showed what looked to be a strong foundation. The weapons in the mode were straight from Chapter 5, ensuring some familiarity. The gadgets introduced as the twist to the mode looked like a great addition, and the map in the trailer looked polished and well designed. With the hype building, Ballistic finally went live. Players flooded in to give the tactical 5v5 a try. It initially seemed like a big hit from the start. Big streamers such as Ninja, Courage JD, and CypherPK were trying the mode and seemed to enjoy it. The player count was healthy as well, peaking at nearly 470,000 players between the ranked and unranked versions. It seemed Epic had delivered a successful new mode, but that wasn't entirely true. Even on day one, there were already some glaring issues. For starters, the matchmaking in the mode was inconsistent. Players would queue in expecting a 5v5 and were surprised to be playing a 3v3 instead. With nearly 500,000 players on the first day, this shouldn't have been an issue. And that wasn't even the worst part. One of Epic's solutions to this problem was to queue players into an already ongoing game. While that sometimes worked, other times it created an even bigger problem. 2 new players would load into an ongoing game that started as a 3v3 but turned into a 3v5. This was due to the matchmaking putting those new players on the same team. Needless to say, that wasn't fair. Another major issue was that Ballistic launched in early access. Epic was clearly acknowledging that the mode wasn't quite done yet, and that showed very quickly. Ballistic only launched with one map. That map was Skyline 10. The map was very polished and a solid map overall, but it quickly got repetitive. Players had already learned most hiding spots, strategies, and optimal routes within the first week of the mode being live. The gameplay started getting stale much faster than expected. Even though there were some glaring issues with Ballistic, the mode was still looking promising, but that slowly started to change. Momentum for the mode slowly started to shift. The initial launch boom was starting to fade. Player counts dropped week after week, and Fortnite stayed silent on the future of the mode. Outside of a few bug fixes and minor adjustments, there were no real updates. Fans of Ballistic were hoping for any sort of news. Over a month later, we finally received something. A new gun was finally added to the mode, the drum gun. It was our first real piece of content since Ballistic had launched. While it was a relief to see that they hadn't forgotten the mode existed entirely, it still wasn't a lot. Skyline 10 remained the only map the mode had. Regardless, it was enough to retain most players a little longer. Soon after, the silence returned. For nearly 2 months, Ballistic would receive no meaningful updates. During that time, the player count continued to dwindle. The mode was averaging 10,000 players daily with peaks of 20,000 concurrent players. With every passing week, those players continued to slowly leave. 10,000 players turned into 7,000, and peaks of 20,000 lowered closer to 13,000. The player base was shrinking, and Epic still wasn't saying anything. That all changed at the end of March. Epic had finally broken their silence on the future of Ballistic, and it was exciting. They released a short announcement introducing a new type of map called shell maps. A shell map was a map that had the groundwork laid, but wasn't quite polished. It lacked the environmental detail that Skyline 10 had, but had enough of the basics to make it a functioning map. At the time, this sounded like the perfect solution to Ballistic's biggest problem, the lack of maps. The update also promised a wave of new weapons, gadgets, and gameplay improvements. For the first time in a while, the future of Ballistic looked promising. A couple weeks later, the April update dropped. The first shell maps arrived, including Hammerfall and Storm Chaser Cove. New weapons and gadgets were added, and many quality of life updates were implemented, such as major matchmaking improvements, preventing uneven matches. Fortnite Ballistic started to feel alive again. They were even dropping trailers for the updates, which players hadn't seen since the launch. Most importantly, communication with the community had returned. Epic began asking players what they wanted to see in the mode. They took this to heart and would release adjustments every few weeks. A May update followed this communication and brought another shell map, more gameplay changes, and several quality of life adjustments, such as the vote to surrender feature mentioned in the community feedback. Then June came along and brought another breath of fresh air into Ballistic with another new shell map, new weapons and gadgets, and improvements to the quality of the game. While the new additions to the mode were great, a new issue was starting to arise with these updates. Epic continued to add shell maps to the mode, but many players began to notice they never bothered to fully polish some of the older ones. This became a growing concern among part of the player base that the system wasn't working as designed. Regardless, the mode carried on with the player count remaining steady. Player counts hovered around 5,000 concurrent players with daily peaks of roughly 10,000. A modest decline, but much better than the drop during the content drought. For a while, Ballistic looks like it may actually recover, but that momentum wouldn't last. Epic had promised another major update to Ballistic in July, but after that announcement, everything went quiet. July came and went, and we heard nothing. Players began to panic that the days of content drought were upon us once again. By the end of August, we had finally received the promised major update from July. A new weapon and gadget were added. There weren't any new maps with this update, but players had finally gotten something they had been asking for a while now. The shell map, Hammerfall, had finally been fully polished, something players had been waiting many months for. It was the start to completing the shell maps, or so we thought. Players had noticed that there wasn't an update trailer this time around. There was a blog post as there usually was, but something was noticeably different. At the end of each blog, the developers would typically announce when the next major update was expected at the end of the post. This time though, there was nothing. The post ended in bug fixes. While the player base initially didn't think much of this, it became a telling clue later on. Months began to pass and the player base was left waiting. Updates had stopped entirely. This was even worse than the initial drought we had after the launch of the game. We had received at least the drum gun a couple months after nothing, but a couple months came and went, and Epic had stayed quiet on Ballistic. By December, the player count continued to dwindle, averaging roughly 4,000 concurrent users and peaks of only 6,000 to 7,000 players. It had been almost 4 months since the last update and nothing new had been announced still. The future of Ballistic was starting to look very bleak, and the silence from Epic only made things worse. By this point, many dedicated players have abandoned the mode. The player base has continued to decline to an average of 2,000 to 3,000 concurrent users and peaks of only 4,000. Epic has made no comments on the mode since August, meaning it has now been nearly 8 months since the last update. In just under a year and a half, Fortnite Ballistic has lost 93% of its player base since the launch. So what exactly caused such a dramatic downfall? It wasn't just one problem, it was several. The shell maps were supposed to speed up the development of new maps, but over time created more unfinished maps than polished ones. The long droughts of content in between the updates caused the mode to lose any momentum it had since launch, and the inconsistent communication from Epic has led players to question whether Ballistic is even still in active development. While the mode briefly had a moment of recovery in the spring, the lack of support for the mode afterwards has led to a declining player base once again. Today, the mode is a shadow of its former self. With the apparent death of Fortnite Ballistic, it raises a bigger question regarding new modes in Fortnite. If those modes don't receive the critical updates they once had, how many more modes will end up in drastic decline such as Rocket Racing and Fortnite Festival? And unfortunately for Ballistic, the lack of communication from Epic may have already sealed its fate.